much for joining me. I'm Tracy. I'm an upcycler. I made and sold my items for many, many years. I quit selling and now I just do DIYs, tutorials. This one's pretty much a class. It's pretty long, but we are going to make this purse and I am going to take you step by step from the very beginning to the very end. Now, we will be making the strap. We'll be making lining. We'll be making pockets. We'll do a magnetic snap closure, all of it. So let's get going. So the first thing I want to do is make two patterns, one for the body of the bag and one for the flap. First thing I want to do is work on the pattern for the body of the bag. It is 12 inches tall and 12 inches across at the widest point. So I got a piece of paper. This is packing paper from Walmart. Wrapping paper makes good pattern paper as well. And I cut out a 12 by 12 square. And now I have to fold it in half. And what I do here, or what you can do, is at the very top, now here's the fold, mark over from this side 5 inches. Okay, now on the open side, measure down 6 inches and make a mark. And all you do here, it requires a little bit of free-handing, is from this dot to this dot, just kind of sketch out a curve, and I like to kind of go close to the side there. And now I want to continue it down. I stay close to the side, and then I start making a curve, and then I sort of flatten it back out at the bottom to that point. And now all I have to do is cut that out. Now, your shape may not be exactly like mine, but that's okay. There's all kinds of different shapes of bags, so don't stress that your curve isn't perfect. I know that can be frustrating. Okay. Now the pattern for the flap of the bag is the same concept, just different measurements. So I started with the square. Well, it's not quite square. It's 7.5 inches tall and 8 inches across. And then I fold it in half. And I take my ruler, and from the folded side, I measure over 2.25 inches, 2.25 inches, and make a mark. And then on the open side, I measure down 4 inches and make a mark. Okay, and so this requires the free-handing again. You just kind of sketch over to the side. I like to stay close to the side through that mark. And then I kind of start coming in and flatten it out towards the bottom. And then we just cut it out. And there you have the pattern for the flap. Okay, so the fabric I'm going to use for this bag, the flap and the body, is this medium weight decorator fabric. I believe it's vintage. I got it off eBay. It's only 23 by 27 inches. I wish it was a little bit larger, but it didn't come like this. I dyed this, and I dyed some doilies in the same dye lot. They can't come out a little bit different. Everything, depending on the fabric, turns out different. I'm not going to go through the dyeing process because not everybody is going to want to dye their items, but I have a lot of videos, and I'm going to link a good one. Just fast forward to the end, and I talk about dyeing in your wash machine. The only difference is, for mine, I used emerald grit dye, and I just used a splash. I need to trace my patterns onto my fabric. I need one of the flap, and I need 2 of the body of the bag. Now, I have to be creative on my fabric because it's so small. For the body of the bag, I am making sure that the group of flowers is towards the bottom because we're going to have a flap and a lot of fringe going on, and I want to be able to see flowers, so I'm tracing this in such a way where the group of flowers are at the bottom. On the back, I'd rather the group of flowers be centered, but my fabric doesn't allow me to do that. So I also have a group at the bottom on that. Now, on the flap, it's a little bit different. I will have some velvet and some trim along the bottom. So I want my flowers on the flap to be towards the top. I'll give you more of a close-up. But basically, you just lay it where you want it, trace around it, and cut it out. One flap and two for the body. Now I have my pattern pieces cut out. I'm going to put the two big ones away for now, and I'm going to work on the flap. What I want to do is add a piece of velvet inside of here. So I went to a pink velvet shirt that I thrifted, and I cut a piece off of the bottom. And it is 1 1/4 inches wide and 35 inches long. How I want to sew this velvet, I want to start up here at the corner, but then I want to taper it down to 1 inch, and it'll be 1 inch all the way around until I get back up to that other corner. So what I need to do is I just made a mark right there at the corner, and then made a mark, a 1 inch mark, and you can draw a whole line if you want, or you can just use the dashes as your guideline. And I am just going to make 1 inch dashes all the way around to give me something to follow when I'm at my machine. Okay, so now it's time to go to my machine and sew my little velvet ribbon on. I'll start with the outside of the ribbon along that chalk line, and I'll extend this a little bit past the top, put my needle in, go forward, back, and I will just do tiny little pinch pleats all the way down. I'll sew over top of that, make another pleat, sew over top of it, and just keep going along that chalk line until I'm all the way to the opposite end. If I don't have enough of this, I think I will, I can just cut some more. I'll be using pink thread, a fairly small straight stitch, and I will just sew as close to the edge of the pink ribbon as I can. This is what it's looking like. And now I'm going to sew the other side. So I will just stick my needle in right here in my machine and sew as close to the edge as I can all the way around. And as I'm sewing, I will just sort of hold those pleats down in place as I sew over top of them. Now I want to add some green lace around the edge. So I went to my little pile of green doilies that I dyed, and I'm cutting some small strips about 1 1/2 inches wide. And you can measure if you want, but I don't want these perfectly 1 1/2 inches. I don't want it all stiff and uniform, so I like to eyeball it because it won't be perfect. Now what I'll do is just take my pile to my machine with my flap and sew these on, and I'll start right up at the top. Now there's a stitch line right there that I can see. I don't know if you can, but I'll put this right at the very top, right on that stitch line, that pink stitching, and I will just pinch pleat that. Sew along that line. Pinch it, pleat it, sew. Pinch it, pleat it, sew. So I have a nice little ruffle, and I'll do that all the way around with assorted doily pieces. Now I want to add a piece of trim right here. And I am going to use this gold and black scallop trim. Here's another trim I may use on the body of the bag, and it's scalloped. On these pretty like Victorian bags, I try to always use scallop trims. They're so much prettier than like some of these straight gimp trims. These just don't look as nice. So I always try to find scallops. So what I'll do is right here at the top, I'll extend this past the top a little bit and sew across it back and forth just to make it secure. And I don't want to lose this pink. I don't want the trim to cover it up. So the bottom of this band, I will sew right at the top of the velvet, not even the stitching, above that even, and try to see as much as that pink velvet as I can. So I'll go back and forth there, and I will use a gold zigzag stitch all the way along, and I'll just keep lining it up as I sew. When I talk about gold thread here, I don't mean gold metallic, I just mean gold colored thread. Okay, so now I want to make loop fringe, and some of my online friends say to use bias tape. So I went to eBay and I bought a lot, L-O-T, of pink bias tape. Now they all said 1/2 inch, but here's the difference. This is a single fold. It looks like this. This is 1/2 inch, and it opens to 1 inch. So if you want 1/2 inch or 1 inch wide, buy the single fold, 1/2 inch, or this is a double fold. It looks like this, but it opens up to 2 inches wide. So if you want like a really wide trim, you can use the double fold. But I right now am preferring the single fold that opens up to 1 inch. Now I'm going to use a light pink, the single fold, and I could iron this, press it open if I wanted, but I like the 1/2 inch. So I am just going to cut this entire strip. They come in 3 or 4 yards typically, and I'm just cutting the whole thing into 5-inch pieces. I need to sew these around the edge, so I am just taking my green lace and I'm pinning it up out of the way so that I don't have to fight that. Okay, so now I want to sew these on. I'll just take this straight to my machine. I made a mark 4 inches down from that corner right here. That's where I'll stop, and 4 inches down on this side. This is where I start, this is where I'll stop. And I'll take each piece of strip here, and I won't sew it like this to make the loop. I will put a little twist in it and then line it up at the top. And I will start here. They all have to be facing on the inside, and we'll just sew along the edge, about 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I will stick my needle of my machine in about here, and I'll add my loop, sew over top of it. Now on the sides, I want them to kind of angle down a little bit. Otherwise, when you get it turned inside out, when we're all done, I don't want it poking out like that. I want it to be sort of angled down. And then, of course, down here, you don't have to worry about it. You can do it straight up because it will be facing down. So I will just butt those up next to one another. Take another one, twist it, sew over this, stop, add another one. And I'll just overlap slightly on the sides. I'll overlap a little bit more on the bottom. And just keep doing that until I get this filled in between those 2 chalk marks. Okay, so there's what my little loop fringe looks like. And now I want to line the back of this. And I have this sort of medium weight. I would say it's a lightweight tapestry or a medium weight sort of decorator fabric that I got on eBay. And this is like the third project I'm using this on. It's really paying for itself. This will be the lining of the flap and the lining for the bag. All I'm going to do here is take my flap pattern, lay it down where I want it on my fabric, and trace around it. And cut it out. I want to put these right sides together. So I have to tuck all this stuff in to find those edges. Now that I have everything tucked in, this is my right side. I'm going to lay it down on top here, and I won't sew across this flat edge, but I will have to pin everything except that. So I'll start at the corner, get that pinned, and I like to go to the opposite corner, pin that, and then just pin neatly all the way around. Now that I have this completely pinned, I have the opening at the top. What I'll do is take it to my machine and sew it. I'll use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll start at the very top and go all the way around. I'll use a fairly small straight stitch. I will probably use a gold colored thread, and when I'm all done doing that, I'll go back and do it again. I like most of my seams on my purses to be double stitched for durability. Now that I have that all stitched, before I turn it right side out, I just need to make little snips. Anytime you have a curve, you want to clip that close to that stitch line you just made, but not through it. And I like to go like every 1/2 inch. That just helps when you turn it right side out, that it lays nice and smooth. Now I can turn this right side out. I have kind of a small opening, so I'm going to have to work with this a little bit. Oh, not too bad. Okay. Now I'm going to get that all straightened out, and then I'll take it to my ironing board and press that smooth. It's a good idea to lay a tea towel over top of it if you're not sure how your materials will react to heat. Just give it a good press. Now I'm just going to run to my sewing machine in that opening. I am going to stitch that closed. No biggie, no pinning or anything. I will just run a small straight stitch close to the edge, and that keeps it from fraying and just keeps everything in place. Now I want to put a beautiful brooch right there. I got this on eBay. I don't believe it's vintage because I didn't pay a whole lot for it, but you can really find some good deals if you don't have thrift stores that sell jewelry. I have some good sources for jewelry, but I got this on eBay. And what I'll do is just take the pin and pin it in place where I want it. And it will take me a few times to get it right, but once it's pinned, then it's easy to sew. So I'll get that pinned. Now I have it pinned where I want it. It's about halfway on that fringe there, this trim. And I will just get some gold colored thread, not metallic, and I will stitch this on. I like to match the thread to the hardware of the actual piece I'm sewing, not the color of the fabric. And I will just try to find little spaces, like right here. I'll stitch, there's a good space right there to catch that brooch. And, a few places. I usually go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I got this little dangling piece. I may or may not sew that on. I may just let that dangle. But I'll get that sewn on. Okay, beautiful. Now, this, I have a little bit of a problem. This is too long. I thought I'd have enough clearance to see more of this flower down here and do a little more decoration, but I have an easy fix. I'm going to make this shorter. So what I'm going to do is take a ruler and measure from the top edge of the flap here down 1.5 inches. Make a mark. Make a mark here just for a little bit of a guideline. And I am just going to cut that off. Okay. And now what I want to do is go to my machine, and this is a bigger opening now. I want to get that sewn shut. So I'll just stay close to the edge, sew a straight stitch. Okay. I'm so much happier with that. You know, this is how it really went when I was selling purses. I was making adjustments all the time. Okay, so now I want to add some lace around the front of the bag. By the way, we're working on the front of the bag now. So just pick your favorite piece that you want for the front, where the flowers are placed low. And I am cutting 2-inch strips of the green lace now, approximately. Okay, I have various pieces cut. You know, they vary in length. It really doesn't matter. I just don't want them too long because I want to alternate them. And I need to sew these 1 inch in, kind of like we did the other one, only this time I don't have to taper it. I will measure 1 inch right there at the top. And then I will just go down the side and mark 1 inch. That'll give me my guideline to sew this lace on. Okay, I have my 1 inch perimeter marked here. And just like the lace on the flap, I will sew this on. I'll stick it in my machine, go forward, back, and just follow that line and do a little bit of pleating as I go until I have it all covered and I'm all the way back up to the top. Now I want to trim the edge of this lace, and I would use that gold scallop trim if I had enough, but I don't. So I am going to use this sort of green and gold, and it has a scallop edge, and I am going to just sew it at the top, go across to make sure it doesn't come apart there, a large green zigzag stitch all the way down the center band. And as I go, I'll be lining up the center right over top of the raw edges of that lace. So go all the way around like that. Okay, so now I want to add some loop fringe to this. And I'm going to start with sort of this mustard brown color. Now this was a double fold bias tape, and I took an iron and I pressed it all open. So now it's 2 inches wide. And I don't want my fringe this wide, and plus I wouldn't have enough. So I'm going to cut this into thirds. And so I will just cut, these do not have to be perfect. I am just going to cut this wide strip into 3 pieces. And I did a little test on this, and it's really not fraying. So that's wonderful. So I don't have to worry about that. Okay, from those skinny strips that I cut out 8 10-inch long pieces, 4 for each side. So I went to the front of my bag. I pinned all these lace pieces up and out of the way so we could see what we're doing. And then from the corner down, I measured 3 inches and I made a mark. And I did the same on this side. Now what I'm going to do is I'll do this at my machine. I want to fit 4 of these within that area. I will start 1/2 inch down from the top. I will twist this like I did the other ones. Lay it 1/2 inch down from the top and sew it on. And then I will take another one, twist it, and overlap that one a little bit, sew it on. All this will be while it's under my presser foot in my machine until I have all 4 on. And then I will come to this side and do the same thing. Okay, now there's my odd looking little bag. Trust the process, it'll be cute. Now I'm taking my lightest pink color that I have, and I'm going to do the same with this as I did with the brown. I am going to cut it into 1/3. Now I'm going to take those strips that I just cut, and I am going to cut a bunch of approximately 7-inch pieces. I want them to come all the way around and be pretty full. So I'll just cut as many as I think it'll take. I may cut them all. I may not. Okay, so now I want to sew these on like I did the flap. Just twist it, double it up, and I will start right underneath of this brown one. And I want to angle these a little bit so they don't stick straight out. So they'll be more like that. So I will just go to my machine, stick my needle in here, and start sewing these on all the way down. And once I get to about here, I don't need to angle them anymore. I can sew those pretty much straight on. And this time, I'm not going to overlap as much because I'll have another layer of fringe, loop fringe underneath or behind it. So I don't need to make this one so full. Okay, these are all sewn on. And now I have a darker shade of pink. And these were a double fold that I cut into 1/3, 3 long strips. And then I cut them into 9-inch pieces. And I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did with this, the light pink. I'm going right over top of the light pink, and I'm going to go all the way around with this color. Now I'm just trimming up these edges. Now I can take the pins out of the lace and see what we have. Okay. There's the fringe all sewn on. Now let's imagine it with the flap. How cute is that? Okay, the next thing I want to do is just a little bit of decoration. I took a ruler and from the edge of the bag, I measured 3 inches and made a little black mark. Now I have this single fold, a different color of fringe, and I am just going to make loops. Now I'll set it right at that dot so I can eyeball this, and I am going to make loops of all different lengths and just kind of have them up in that general area until I just feel that it's full enough. Now this is just personal preference. You do as many or as little or none at all if you don't want to. Now I ran out of that. I think Here's the other half that I cut. I'm just going to add a few more, I think. Okay. I think I'm happy with that. I'm just going to trim that right there. Now, I just want to stitch that right across the top of the bag. I'm just going to take a piece of temporary tape, put it right there. Just has to hold till I get to my machine. And I will put a straight stitch as close to the top of the bag, catching all that ribbon as I can. Now I'm just going to trim the top and remove the tape. Okay, so for the next step, I have this darker ecru color lace, a couple pieces, and I'm just going to start cutting this. I'm just going with what I feel here. There's no rhyme or reason. I think I'll cut the corners off of here. I'll give you better measurements and things like that. And when I start placing this, it'll make more sense to you. But I'm just cutting up a bunch of pieces for the time being. What I want to do with that lace is sew it to the top. Here's the back of the bag, and here's the front of the bag. I want to sew it to the top of both. And the plan here is to have it more short in the center and longer on the sides. And so I think my longest pieces are about 9 inches. My shortest maybe 4. And so I kind of layered this up here, and I will show you. So I took a piece from one of the doilies, and I will do all this sitting at my machine. So maybe I'll sew this one on first, doing some pleating. And then, now this is just sort of artistry. There's just no way to tell you exactly, but I'm trying to get you to understand a little bit my thought process. And so when I sew the sides, I want to come in about 1/2 inch because I'm going to have to sew along here to sew the bag together. So I don't want the lace to get in the way of that. So I'll start in 1/2 inch. Now I have a piece like this, and I won't start at the very edge. I will start maybe 4 inches in and sew it at that 1/2 inch mental mark there. So this kind of drapes, and then I'll do some pleating. And then I have another piece for the opposite side. Start 1/2 inch in, but maybe I'll start about here and sew that and do some pleating. And I have one more little piece. Maybe I will just sew 2 inches in the middle, maybe right there. Now you just play with yours and do what you think looks good on your bag. And so same concept here. Longer on the side, I'll start in 1/2 inch, opposite, and then I'll fill the center in. Maybe I want to add another piece. I'll just feel it all out as I go. You know, I think I'll pin this. It probably would be more simple once you get it all laid out. It's easier to eyeball it here than at the machine. Either way, if you want to just wing it at your machine, go ahead. If you want to lay it all out and get it just right and pin it, just stick a lot of pins in there. And then at my machine, I'll just stay very close to the top of the bag. Just do a single straight stitch all the way across. Okay, so this is what my front looks like. And here is what the back looks like. Now it's time to put the bag together. And what I want to do first is add the flap to the back piece of the bag. And so what I have to do is take a ruler and measure the top and find the center and make a mark. I'm using a black marker. And then on the flap back side, measure along the top, find the center, and make a mark. Now what I want to do is put right sides together, line up those marks, and stick a pin right at the very top of the bag and the top of the flap. And now I know it's centered, and then I can pin the rest of it so it's nice and secure while I sew. Now that it's all pinned, I'm just going to go to my machine and sew a straight stitch close to the top, approximately 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, since this is so thick, I am going to go over it twice for extra durability. And a jeans or denim needle in your machine be very helpful here. And just go nice and slow because we're getting kind of thick. Okay, I have that all stitched. I kind of trimmed across the top. That's what it looks like. And normally I would press this now, but I don't want to on this one because I don't want to flatten out that lace. I want my lace to be nice and fluffy. Now I want to add this piece to this piece. But before I do, I have to get everything up and out of the way. I need to find the edges on this side, which will take me a little bit of time. You can make things go up because we won't be sewing the top, but just get everything in so you can find the sides of the bag. Okay, so I lifted the flap on the back of the bag up and out of the way, tucked these in, and now I want to put right sides together. This is the right side, this is the right side, and I will put it on top. And this will take a little bit of time to pin. I always start at the corner. Let me go grab my pins. I start at the corner, and then I like to pin the other corner. That just helps make sure everything's lined up. So I'll pin that. And then now I will just pin all around here, not across the top, of course, and just take my time and make sure everything's kind of tucked out of the way. Stick a pin. Sometimes I'll work down this side and then go to the opposite just so that everything's nice and balanced. Now that I have everything pinned, I just need to sew it. And I will start up at the top here, go all the way around to the top on the other side. And a 1/4 inch seam allowance is ideal. Sometimes you just got to let the bag dictate what you're doing. If you need to go larger than 1/4 inch to catch everything that's sandwiched in there, that's perfectly fine. So I will go around twice for extra durability. Now it's all sewn, and I'm just going to make those little notches about 1/2 inch apart all the way around so that it lays smoothly when I turn it right side out. And now I can turn it right side out and see what we have. Okay, here's what we have so far. How fun, right? Now at this point, a lot of times I press these seams, but I just don't want to flatten out any of that ribbon or details that we have, so I'm not going to press this. But now I need to make a strap. I'm going to make my strap out of this blazer. It's like a velvety chenille. I'm going to do a shoulder strap instead of a crossbody, and I like it to be at about 30 inches. How much space I have on here may dictate the length of the strap. If you want a crossbody, I like my crossbodies pretty short, like at 47 inches. But when I sold, 49 inches was a typical length that I would make. I've gone up to 72 on a custom order, but around 49. A taller person maybe 52 inches, but I'm looking at 30 for a shoulder strap. Here's my pretty standard way of cutting open a blazer or something. First, I cut the sleeves off. On this one, I cut the collar off because it's nice. And then I just cut across the shoulder seam on both sides. And that lets me open things up and see what I have. Oh, I forgot to tell you the sleeve. I always find the shortest seam. There's a seam right here. And I cut along that and open that up as well. Okay, I cut 2 pieces out of my sleeves, 1 from each sleeve. And they are 4.5 inches wide. I want my strap to be 2 inches wide, so I doubled that number to give me 4, and then I added 1/2 inch for seam allowance. So I cut these both at 4.5, and now I need to sew them together to make one long strap. And I will not measure, they're plenty long, but I won't measure the exact length until I'm done sewing. So I'm just putting right sides together, going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance and double stitch that. If you have a blanket or tapestry or piece of fabric that's long enough, you can avoid all this rigmarole. Okay, I want my strap 30 inches long. So I am cutting this at 30.5. I want to add 1/2 inch for seam allowance. Okay, so now all I do with the right side facing up towards me, I'm taking a durable like cording or something, a ribbon might work. Yarn does not work because we're going to tug on this and we don't want it to break inside our strap because that's a nightmare. So I just cut it a few inches longer on each side. And all I do now is fold this over and let me grab my pins and pin it all the way down, just making sure that cord is tucked down in the fold here. Okay, now I have this all pinned and I need to sew it. One end will be open and one end will be closed when I'm done. So what I'll do is I will stick one end in my machine, and where this cord is, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the whole thing. I will go over that maybe 6 or 7 times back and forth just to make sure that stays in place. And then I'll continue across the top and go down the side. 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down, and I'll end here. I won't close this end up. Now this time I won't double stitch the side because once I get it turned inside out, we'll do a top stitch and that will make it durable. Okay, I'm done sewing. Now the end that is completely closed up, you can go ahead and trim that and cut that cord off now. Now it's time to turn it right side out. You always work from the bottom, the closed end. So I'm going to take this cord. I work from the top a little bit. I just need to get some fabric down there to work with, you know, and then starting it is always the hardest, but it shouldn't be that hard. But once you get it started, it's easy peasy. Fuzz in my mouth because I have to lick my fingers to get this going. So once you get it going, you should be able to just slide it. Some materials are easier than others. This one's pretty good. See, now I see the actual fabric poking through. I'm going to grab that because that's more sturdy than the cord. And just keep working it right side out. Okay, last piece is through. Just kind of poke that corner out. You can use a pin. Now you can clip off that cord real close to the fabric there. And now I'm going to take it to my machine or ironing board and press this. And I like the seam to be on the outside when I press it. I've done it in the center before, the underneath center, but I think on the outside is the easiest. So I'll get that straightened out and give it a good press. Okay, now I just want to do 2 top stitches, one on each side. And all I'll do is coordinate the thread with my fabric, and I'm going to use gold colored thread. And on this side, I'll just line the edge with my presser foot. That helps me keep a really straight line. Now this will be seen. You want it nice and neat. And I'll just run a straight stitch all the way down the side. And then when I'm done with that side, I'll go to the opposite and do the same thing. Here are my 2 ends. Here's the open one, here's the closed. The closed one is bulky because it has that seam inside, and I need to sew that to my purse, and I don't want to sew over all that bulk. So I'm going to cut like 1/4 of an inch off of there. Now I can stitch across there if I'm afraid my top stitching might come out, but it probably won't, but I'll just take a precaution here. Now I have to attach the strap to the bag. So what I do is just open this up. I need to find the side seam, which is right here. And I will take the right side, if there is a right side of your strap. Mine's pretty much the same on both sides. And I'm going to line the center of the strap with the seam and the top of this with the top of the bag. And so I will just set it there and pin it. And I'll pin it a couple times. And then, so that's all nice and lined up with the top of the bag. I want to make sure this is nice and straight when I bring it over to the opposite side. Find the seam, which is right here. So I want to make sure it's all nice and straight, right? But now I have to put the right sides together, so I have to sort of turn it upside down and line it up with the top of the bag and pin it. Okay, now I have both sides pinned, and now I just have to sew them. And so what I'll do is go to my machine, use a fairly small straight stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just sew right across the top, right there. And I'll go over it about 5 times because there's a lot of stress. This is a stress point. You want to make sure it's nice and sturdy. Now the rest of the sewing on my bag, I'll do with this front plate off of my sewing machine. Okay, here's the strap. It's looking like a purse. So cute. Now we have to do the lining. It's always once the artistry part is done, the lining's kind of basic, but it's necessary. So let's get to it. Okay, so I'm using this floral fabric. The only thing I have to do a little bit different, and I need to trace this twice, but I need to come out, I'm going to try 1/8 of an inch. I've come out 1/4, but I'm going to extend past this pattern 1/8 of an inch and then cut right back in to the pattern. 1/8 of an inch out and then cut right back in to trace the pattern exactly. That just helps it, because of the way we have to put it on the outside of the bag to pin it, it just helps it lay nice and smooth if you go a little bit wider there. But other than that, you just trace this pattern twice. I think the best fabrics for lining are like medium weight decorator fabrics. If your fabric is too thin, it will just be all floppy inside, but you can do like a medium weight fusible webbing if you have a thin fabric that you absolutely want to use and love. And you don't want to go too super thick either. So just a nice sturdy medium weight, I can't think and cut at the same, medium weight decorator fabric, or like a thin tapestry sort of fabric like this. Now that I have these cut out, I want to cut out 2 pockets. And I have this rectangle pattern. It's 7.5 inches tall and 6.5 across. And I'm using this fabric. A lot of times I do pattern on pattern, but this is what I have. These are actually from a pair of pants I used on another project. So I just traced around it, cut it off, did 2. So the next thing I want to do to the pocket is do a little ironing. And so this is my pocket. I went to my ironing board and I pressed over the side seam 1/2 inch and ironed it. Then I went to the opposite side, folded it over 1/2 inch and ironed it. And then I went to the bottom, folded it up 1/2 inch and ironed it. And then the top is a little different because I want the top to be finished. And so I folded it over 1/2 inch, ironed it, folded it over again 1/2 inch and ironed it. Now we have a nice clean top. And now I'll go to my ironing board and do the same with this side. And now I just have to take these to my sewing machine and sew that down. And I will just come down 1/4 inch and just do sort of a top stitch all the way across the top. Now I want to pin the pockets to the bag, and I just eyeballed it and centered it this way. Can't really see inside the bag to see a real, subtle differences like that. So I don't bother measuring, but I will measure the top here. I want it 2.5 inches down from the top, and I will stick a pin in it. Now make sure this is equal, 2.5 inches down, stick a pin in it. And then I will continue and just pin the other 2 corners here. And then when I'm done pinning, all I have to do is sew. And I will double stitch this, and I will start at the top over here. And this I will stay close to the edge, as close to the edge as I can on all 3 sides. And then I will double stitch it for durability. Okay, so now I want to add closures to the lining, and my closure of choice are magnetic snap closures. Now I have this kit. These are 18 millimeter and they're assorted antique gold, silver, and gold. And I'll put the link to that in my description. Now, if you're not familiar with these, they're magnetic and they're very strong. They have sort of an innie and an outie, and they go together, one on each side of your bag, and holds your bag closed. And so for this bag, I chose the antique gold. And so I'll need this piece and this piece. They have the little tabs on the back. And I need 2 backs. Now, my kit, they're all silver because they're not seen and it doesn't really matter. But I'll need 2 of those and then an innie and an outie. Now I'll just choose one lining. I'll just do one at a time. And I will take the back piece, and that center circle is where I'll do all the measuring. The first thing I want to do is sort of lay it down where I think it will go. So I know I want it down 1.5 inches from the top and centered this way. I already measured this, so I'm kind of cheating, but okay. And so once I get it about where I want it, I measured down to make sure that circle is 1.5 inches down from the top. And then I find the center this way. And I make sure the circle is centered this way. And once I have that centered, I'll just carefully hold that and mark those 2 side lines right there. And now I have a mark where that will go. And the next thing I'll do is I'll take a sturdy little, I like to use denim. Now this doesn't have to be so perfect, but this just adds extra security to your snap. I'll make 2 little lines on that one as well. Now what I need to do is cut those slits. And be careful. Just make the teeniest, tiniest little cut, because you can always cut bigger. I need to cut these as well. You can always cut bigger, but once you've cut it too big, then your snap is weak and you have to either deal with it or start all over. So I made teeny tiny little slits, and now I'll just choose whatever one I want. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to take those 2 tabs and I'm going to slide it through those slits. And my slits are a little small, but I'd rather that. Okay, so I slid that through. There are the tabs on the back. Now I will turn it over to the back side. I'll take my denim piece that I cut, slide that over top, and then I will take a back piece, slide it over those tabs, and then I'll take some sort of tool. I like these because they have the rubber bottoms, and so you can either slide your tabs out or in. I've seen it done both ways. I typically go out, so you just need to slide those tabs outward, and then I'm going to shake the camera because I like to tap them down so that they're nice and sturdy. So that's what the back looks like, and that's what the front side looks like. And now I have to take the opposite snap and do the same thing with the opposite lining here. Now it's time to sew my lining together, and I will put one on top of the other, right sides together, and I will pin it. I will only pin from this corner to about right here where it curves. And same on this side. I need to leave the bottom open, but I want to come around the curve a little bit. So I'll just get that pinned. Now it's all pinned. I stopped pinning right here, leaving a gap. Now I'll go to my machine and sew it. I'll start at the top, use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, straight stitch, and just go all the way down the side and stop at that pin. And the same on this side. And when I'm all done, go back and do it again for extra durability. Now that I have this sewn, I'm just making little snips like I did on all the other rounded seams. Now I'm going to turn this right side out and give it a good press. Just going to push out those seams. After you iron it, you have to turn it inside out again. Now it's time to put the lining inside the bag. So what I have to do is lift that flap up and put it behind the bag. I want this opening nice and clear. So I'm taking the strap and laying it nicely down beside the bag on both sides so I can see that opening. Now I'm going to take my lining and the bottom part that we left open goes over top of the whole entire bag. And now I want to line the top of the lining up with the top of the bag, because I will have to pin that all together. Okay, so the important thing to remember here when you're lining this up, so here's the seam of the lining on the outside. Now here's the seam of the purse. Those have to be lined up if you want your snaps to line up nicely inside the bag. So I'm lining up those two seams, and I will stick a pin, on the outside of the bag. It has to be on the outside because of the way we sew it. Stick a pin there. I just like to stick a pin on each side of the seam. It's almost impossible to get a pin through the seam, so I just go close to each side. And then I will line those up on the opposite side and pin them as well. Now these two side seams are all pinned, and the rest is just following the top of the bag, and I am just pinning it all the way around. Okay, so now I have the top all pinned. I just need to sew it. I will slide it over that arm of my sewing machine. I like to start in the back or close to a side seam. Try to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, you kind of have to let the bag dictate what you're doing. Usually I go larger than 1/4 inch, but I'll go all the way around twice. Now I have that all sewn, and I'm just going to do a little trimming here so we don't have a lot of bulk when we turn it right side out. Now that it's all sewn, I can pull this lining up. I always get excited here to see how well the lining goes with the bag. Okay, so now what I have to do, I have this opening still at the bottom, and I just need to close that up. So I like to tuck these in. A lot of times I'll just do this at my machine, tuck and sew, but I'm going to pin it today. And be generous when you tuck that in, because a lot of times these linings are longer, seem longer than the bag. So I'm going in probably a good inch right there. And just pin along. I'll get that pinned all the way along the bottom. Okay, now that I have that all pinned, I'm just going back to my machine. I'll start about right here, and I'll go very close to the bottom so that it looks nice. This will be sort of a top stitch, and get that hole all closed up. And I'll go over it twice for durability. Now it's almost complete. We just need to shove the lining in and do a little ironing. And I am just going to play with that lining. Make sure it's all the way down to the seams of the purse. Now I'm just going to go inside and go around the perimeter and just press this nice. Now at this point, a lot of times I'll do a top stitch, but there's just too much going on here. A top stitch might look sloppy. You just kind of shift it and take your time. Now I need to go over where the strap is, and I've stuck tea towels in here to iron. If you have a heat sensitive fabric, just takes a little bit of finesse. So I'll get that all crisp and clean, and we'll take a look at it again. Actually, I want to show you one more thing. I like to do this at the very end. I'll snap that lining, get everything lined up the way it would be as if I were carrying it, and then I go right over top of the top part of the bag. Okay, here it is all done. Now keep in mind, this is just a basic concept. You can do any sort of styles that you want. You could go more hippie, you could go more bohemian. It just depends on the fabrics that you use. And this loop fringe, that could have been leather fringe or fringe, that is store-bought, the fringy fringe, whatever you want. It could have been all lace. So once you have this basic concept, oh my gosh, I've made so many different looking purses with this style, this flap and this curve. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a close-up, try to show you a little more what the inside looks like. And I thank you so, so much for watching.